So welcome back, everybody. Let's open the source sheet. Today is class 48. And last week we talked about the reason for the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed in the time of Sancheriv, or basically during the time of Menachem. And that was the main chiddush of last week's shir, was that even though people talk about the first time of being destroyed under Tzidkiel, I tried to show you when you study Sefer Malachim, the main destruction of the grand monarchy of the north and the south, and like the great years of the first temple period, is by the Assyrians in the time of Menachem. Really, basically from the time of Achaz, Chizkiel, and Menachem, that's when the Assyrian conquest is the greatest. There's a short recovery we talked about briefly under Yoshiel, but that all falls apart when the Babylonians come and take over. And the goal of the first year was to show you that the main destruction and the decree of destruction was from the time of Menachem, and that's the big three that all the rabbis are talking about: the idol worship and the arayot and murder, etc. That was the big reasons. But the reason for destruction, the time of Tzidkiel or Yehoiakim beforehand, the last under the Babylonians, was more for a lack of social justice and corruption. So again, last week we talked about the Assyrian conquest in this area, and today I circled in red this time period, Yoshiel's rise to power, which coincides with Ashur's fall and reaching a high point right before Bavel becomes a superpower, and then Bavel coming and basically wiping everything out, even though we reached a high point again in the time of Yoshiel. So we're going to talk about this time period with Yoshiel. Now, what I want to begin with is a key point. I want to show you in the Nevi'im that, and this is really sometimes hard to swallow, but the idea that God says over and over again, and the main thing I tried to get across last week, is that the biggest times of destruction, be it for the Assyrians or later for the Babylonians, is pretty much when we're the most religious, when we're doing our best. Meaning, Chizkiel does this tremendous repentance, and despite all that, Ashur comes in and wipes out the northern tribes and most of Judea. Jerusalem saved at the last minute. It doesn't make sense to the people how that could be happening, and that's what Isaiah has to explain. It wasn't enough building up the temple and getting rid of idol worship and getting rid of the Bamot. You still didn't fix your society, and that's chapter 1 of Chizkiel. That's chapter 1 of Isaiah, which we read yesterday in Shul. Hopefully that haftarah made a little more sense based on the shir last week. To be recovery in the time of Yoshiel. Again, remember, Menachem is angry with God for not helping Chizkiel enough as he thought he should have, and he rebels against God, and then Ashur basically puts him into exile. We saw that last week. And then this recovery in the end of Menachem's time period begin with Yoshiel, when Ashur actually falls apart and Bavel takes over. I wanted to show you two parallel sources, one in Isaiah and one in Yirmiyahu, where they have to explain to the people why God is taking an enemy who's evil and cruel and using them as a whip. We'll see why I use the word whip. As a tool to punish Am Yisrael, even though they're way worse than the Jewish people. The fact that God uses an enemy who's evil to punish us doesn't mean that enemy are righteous. It means they're evil, but God's using them as a tool. And now, I'll explain. We'll take the chapter in Isaiah, which I think we talked about briefly last week. I want to show you, just to show you how Isaiah puts the blame on the people, even though Ashur is evil. He says, this is chapter 10 in Isaiah from the beginning. Woe to the people who are passing laws, who are doing judicial reform, but it's unrighteous, it's unjust, writing their own rules, so everything's legal. But the legalities, they're making laws that prefer the rich, and they take advantage and they mistreat the poor. Okay, taking advantage. Now, you can make things that are legal, but laws that basically take advantage of people's difficult situations and give advantages to the wealthy. Then he says, what are you going to do when God comes to punish you? See, the word shoah comes from here, and to this disaster, when it comes from far away, who are you going to run away to? In trouble. Okay, and then basically, after all these things, he says, despite all the punishments God brought, there's more punishments coming. God didn't finish punishing you. There's more to come. Then he begins in a new parsha. Hoi Ashur Shevet Api. Chapter 10, verse 5. No, I'm sorry, is that chapter 10? Oh, yeah. I think it's chapter 10, and I said verse 5. Hoi Ashur Shevet Api. Wo Tashur, the rod or the whip of my anger. That's why I use the word whip. Umatehu bi'adam zamin, tigbol, that parallelism. God is using Ashur as his whip, as his staff to hit us with his anger. I'm sending him against an ungodly nation, a nation who's corrupt. Okay? The nation that I'm angry with, I'm going to command him to take the shlosh shalal, the vosmaz, basically to take spoils and attack, and basically to just tread over him, basically to destroy them. Now, how about Ashur himself? Who? That's Ashur lo chenidameh. Ashur themselves don't see themselves as doing it in the name of God, and his heart is not thinking that way because he's evil. He wants to destroy. He wants to wipe out nations. He wants to take over. He says, just like he says, all my ministers will be like kings, and just like I destroyed Karkamish, which is a big city up in Syria, and Kalno and Arpad, all these big cities, and just like I destroyed Damascus and Shomron, okay, and just like I did to Yerushalayim, to Shomron and its gods, Cain has said Yerushalayim Matzabeh. But just like I destroyed Shomron and Damascus and all these big cities, Jerusalem will save the same fate. Then Isaiah says, when God comes to, after finishing punishing, he's going to save Yerushalayim at the last minute from Ashur, and that leads us into the end of chapter 10, where but he's talking about the haughtiness of the king of Ashur. Okay, because the king says, I can do everything myself. I'm wise, I'm bright. I'm taking over all these different nations. I'm gonna basically taking eggs from a from the nest of a bird and collecting this from the nest. That's how I'm collecting all the nations. And then God makes fun of him. The Navi says, is the axe going to be haughty against the person holding the axe? In other words, God is the person holding the axe, and the garzen, the axe, is the Ashur. And he's saying, why are you being so haughty? I'm the one sending you. Don't let that get to your head. And therefore, I'm going to come and punish you for what you've done wrong. Now, I'm going to take that as a background to understand what we do today in Yirmiyahu, who's writing Sefer Melachim at the end. So in Yirmiyahu chapter 25, we'll have something very similar. We'll go back to the background of this. But remember, this is the word of God to Yirmiyahu in chapter 25, in the 4th year of Yehoiakim, which is the first year of Nebuchadnezzar taking over reign, defeating the Assyrians and taking over Mesopotamia. It didn't take over Israel yet, but the beginning of their conquest of the Middle East. And that's the big date that all biblical dating is anchored on. Again, the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, I think it's 609 BCE, is going to be the 4th year of Yehoiakim. What's he saying? He says, Yirmiyahu has been warning you for the last 23 years. Remember, from the 13th year of Yoshiel until now, 23 years, God's been speaking to me, and you haven't listened. God sent all his prophets to warn you. Tell the people, Shuvah namish darko haran, fix your bad ways and your plans. If you want to stay in the land, we saw that all in chapter 7 in Yirmiyahu, which God's giving you. And therefore, now here's my point that I wanted to show you. He goes on with the indictment, and now the punishment. Lachen kol mar Hashem tzvot, verse 8. Because you, the nation, didn't listen to my rebuke. This is key to understanding the end of Beit Rishon. This is our topic today. What happened in the end of the first temple period, and why was the temple destroyed? And remember, the fast days are not remembering what happened, but why it happened. It says, I'm going to take these families from the north, and now specifically, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, my servant. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar is called the servant of God, Avdi. I'm going to bring him on this land, and all its inhabitants, and use them to wipe everybody out. And then there won't be any more rejoicing. Things will be so bad. Yirmiyahu later in chapter 31 is going to talk about in Nechama and comfort. Odi Shama, once again we'll hear in Yerushalayim post the sun, but the prophecy of comfort is, which will be later on, is based on this prophecy of destruction, which we sing at weddings. Okay, now. Yirmiyahu is telling the people, the Babylonians are going to take over for the next 70 years, even though they're evil. And here's my point, like with Ashur. I'm going to use them for the next 70 years as my whip to punish all the nations who've been evil, and then I'm going to punish them for their evil. They're not. It wasn't that the Babylonians were this righteous nation, and I'm rewarding them for their good behavior by allowing them to conquer other nations. They're evil like everybody else. I happen to choose them to be my whip, to punish other people, to punish other nations, and therefore, after I finish using them, when the 7 years are over, I'll punish them for everything they'll be doing wrong, and then I'll bring upon them and the land of the Chaldeans, etc. Everything I said, which Yirmiyah said about the Nevi'im. At the end of Sefer Yirmiyahu, from chapters 47, 46 to the end, he goes nation by nation of how they'll be punished. First, the nations, the Babylonians are punished, and then what will happen to Babylon itself. And then, why? Because they also mistreated other nations, etc. They'll get their punishment for what they've done. So every nation gets their ultimate punishment. It won't happen right away. And the Nevi'im have to explain God's, I guess, global politics and dealing with the core problem that all the people can't understand. How could God allow a nation who's way more evil than we are? How can he send them to punish us? People simply don't buy it. And Yirmiyahu, first Isaiah, and then Yirmiyahu have to explain to the people, why is God allowing an evil nation to punish us? Not because they're righteous, but because we're evil. But we need to know one day they'll get the punishment as well. So that's the background I wanted to explain. That the fact that God allows one nation to be successful isn't always an indicator that they're righteous, but he might be using them to punish us for our bad behavior. But most people don't like that type of relationship, and that makes them angry with God, and that's why Menachem got angry with God, and that's why people leave God. And that's classic anger that Shir Tazinu talks about. Don't blame God when things go wrong, blame yourselves. Now, just a quick review what happened. Now we want to get to the Churban at the time of Tzidkiyahu, basically in the end of Beit Rishon. That was our topic today. Just a real quick review of the last 40 years of the First Temple period, which are the 40 years of Yirmiyahu's career. So we talked, let's go back to our map here for a minute, or chart up on top. We talked about everything falling apart in the time of Menachem, the decree of Churban. Ashur falling apart towards the end, Yoshiel doing tshuva, repenting, and fixing everything up, got rid of all the idol worship, and then tragically being killed in Megiddo, and then with Yehoiakim taking over, we'll talk about that soon, and then Tzidkiyahu. I want to talk about these two final acts of destruction, and why is there 11-year gap between the first wave of Babylonian conquest and the final destruction of the temple. That's the goal of today's shir. So to do that, I want to go over Yoshiel's career. Maybe we should read it real fast and just review it real quick. Let me open up my sefer. Actually, we'll open up in Divrei Yamim. Be better. We use Divrei Yamim. Divrei Hayamim. I want to do the story of Yoshiel in Divrei Yamim. Should be 34. Okay. Yoshiel became king. Remember, Ammon, his father, was assassinated. He was only king for 2 years, which means, and then the people who assassinated the king, they took revenge on them. And basically, Ammon, who was an evil king, who continued the ways of Menachem, his advisors are running the country. When Yoshiel becomes king, he's only 8 years old, so other people running the country. He's king for 31 years. He does good in the eyes of God. He follows the way of David. And the 8th year of his reign, when he's 16, he's still young, he's still a teenager, he begins becomes religious. Basically, he's probably following first Zephaniah, who's a prophet predicting destruction at the end of Menachem, the beginning of Yoshiel. And probably that has an effect on effect on Yoshiel. And then Yirmiyahu will begin to become his advisor, and they begin the religious reform. So when he's 16, 8th year of his reign, he begins the Drosh to turn to God, becomes religious. And 4 years later, he's 20 years old now. In the 12th year of his reign, when he's 20, he began to cleanse Jerusalem from all the idol worship. And basically, in a nutshell, in verse 4, he destroys all the idol worship and everything the Menashe and Ammon had set up. He destroys it all. He
We're
breaks
not
down
seeing anything on the screen.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? That's not good. Thank you for reminding me. Okay. My mistake. Here we go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So let's read it again. Okay. Sorry about that. Divrei Yamin, chapter 2. What chapter is that? 34. Okay. 8th year. He's 8 years old when he becomes king. 8th year of his reign, when he's 16, he starts doing tshuva. Okay. And in the 12th year of his reign, when he's 20, he begins cleansing Jerusalem from all the trouble. And if he wipes out all the idol worship, gets rid of basically everything that we saw last week that Menashe put in. Remember, we saw last week Menashe bring all the big terrible sins. He gets rid of all that, and he burned the bones of the Kohanim who served on all these altars on them, just like the earlier prophets said way back in the time of Rehoboam. And here we see that the Jews have returned now to up to the north, and therefore in the cities of Menashe and Ephraim and Shimon, all the way to Naphtali, he got rid of all that idol worship, broke down the Mizbachot, etc. And the 18th year of his reign, they find the Sefer Torah. I think we talked about that briefly before. And what I try to explain is it can't be that there was no Torah beforehand, because they're doing tshuva 6 years earlier. They're renovating the temple. In the middle of the renovation, they find the Sefer Torah, and he's going to use that as a catalyst to get the people to do better tshuva. We're going to skip the whole story about finding the Sefer Torah and getting the tshuva doing, but what they bring the Kohanim who find the Sefer Torah, bring it to the king. They get all amazed. They make a big deal about it. Shaphan, the scribe, tells the king about the Sefer he found. They rent their clothes, etc. They call the prophetess Huldah to see what's happening. And then Huldah tells him it's a lost cause. So Huldah basically repeats the Gzar from the time of Menashe. Here's the word of God, I'm going to bring an evil upon Jerusalem. It's just written on the book of all the curses, because they've left me. But tell the king, Yoshia, who sent me, it won't be in your time period because you did tshuva. But what does the king do? The king sends and gathers all the elders of Jerusalem together, of Yehudah. They go to the Beit HaMikdash. We'll talk about this proper tshuva. They cry out, they read the Sefer Abrit, and they make this great gathering. They make a great Passover. We'll see in a minute. And see all the things Menashe did. Yoshua got rid of all the toivot from the entire land, got rid of all the idol worship. In a nutshell, he cleans house and gets rid of all the idol worship. And there was never a king as righteous like Yoshua. So in chapter 35, we talk about the great Passover he does. And it says afterwards, I think we saw this, there was never a Passover like that. In verse 18, there was never a Passover like that since the time of Shmuel. Shmuel's great tshuva. And despite all that, that was near 18, then here's what's important for our share. After Yoshua got the house done, did tremendous tshuva, etc., Paro Necho, the king of Egypt, comes on his way to fight the Babylonians in a big battle in Carchemish. He wants to take over the area from the Babylonians. There's a big war happening up there. Now, Carchemish was first taken over by the Assyrians. Now the Babylonians taken over. Now the Egyptians try to take over on the way towards the Euphrates River. And Yoshua doesn't want him to come through the country. He matches up to meet him. Now, Vaishlach elav malachim lemor mali v'lach melech Yehuda. Paro Necho, the Egyptian king, isn't fighting Judea. He says, leave me alone. I'm marching. You're not, I just need to march through your country. Pretty much like what we saw in Moshe talked about. We want to march through Edom, and king of Edom tells Israel, tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you can't trespass through my land. If you come, I'm going to fight you. There's no trespassing, take a bypass road. Don't come through my land. In a similar way, Yoshua thinks he's so strong, he can tell the Egyptian army what to do. So the king of Egypt says, I'm not fighting you, leave me alone, just let me walk through. Okay, but Yoshua doesn't listen. Lo hasiv Yoshua panav mimeno, ki lelachem bo yitchapes. He got already prepared for battle. Okay, v'lo shamau divrei Necho mipi Elohim v'yavo lelachem b'bikat Megiddah. Here's what's most important. Yoshua's decision to take on the Egyptians and not allow their army to march through Israel that was the wrong decision. He should have listened to God. It seems from here that the Navi told him, don't do it. But his right-wing advisors, and they were so successful, Yoshiel, and the growth was so great, and the army was so strong, they thought they could take on a superpower. And that haughtiness and that feeling that our army is great, we can do it ourselves, and God should be with us because we're so religious. Yoshiel thought it was okay to do something, but the word of God was not to do that. In other words, Yoshiel and his advisors, and this is going to be in the background to the reason for the Qurban, because of the success of Yoshiel, once Ashur fell, and for the first time we have an independent country, and we're growing leaps and bounds, and we're growing, and our borders are expanding, and our army is strong, and we're no longer under Assyrian rule, and there is no other superpower in the Middle East. We think we're as good as everybody else, and that overconfidence enables us and encourages us to take on the Egyptian army. God says, no, that's not your issue. Let them go through. Don't get involved with them. And they go and meet in Megiddo. I'm sure you know the map. That's the critical place on the road on the way up north. What happens in the middle of that battle? The archers happen to hit Yoshiel. He's about to die. There's a kina that will say Tisha B'Av about this thing. I think it's kina 22, I think. Depends how you count them. But there's one of the kinot about the death of Yoshiel and all the arrows coming to him, etc. And he tells the king, that the king tells the people, his servants, get me out of the battlefield so they don't see me dying. And they put him on the chariot. They bring him back to Yerushalayim. He dies on the way. And he's buried in Jerusalem. And everyone is basically sad and mourning his death. Now, you understand why the people are so upset. The most religious king ever dies in battle. How could God allow that to happen? I'm trying to paint a picture, which is so critical to understand what causes the Qurban. We finally have this great religious king, and you see the parallels to Chizkiel. Chizkiel was in a very similar manner. As soon as he became king, he did this great religious reform, fixed us up the temple, and still it's not enough, and God allows the Assyrians to wipe us out. The people don't buy it. And that's what Isaiah has to explain in chapter 1 of Isaiah, why God's allowing Ashur to destroy us, again, because of lack of social justice. We read that on Shabbat. In a similar manner, Yoshiel, this great righteous king, fixes up the temple, gets rid of all that worship, and God isn't allowing them to defeat their enemies. The fact that you're religious and you think you're following God doesn't mean you can take on superpowers and think God will be with you, because it's not enough simply to fix up your temple and get rid of idol worship. Your society has to be just and upright. And they had too much confidence in their military strength. And everyone's sad. Therefore, Yirmiyahu begins to lament the death of Yoshiel. Remember, Yirmiyahu was his Rabbi. And all the people sang, and all the singers, etc., had their lamentations for Yoshiel. Was that when Echa was written? That's a machloket among the commentators. And this becomes the custom in Israel about the kinot. Again, that's in the commentators talk about. Some people say that's when Echa is composed, but our custom of saying kinot for the Qurban is based on these psukim, even though the temple wasn't destroyed yet. But the big kinot come on the death of Yoshiel. The rest of the words of Yoshiel and written and how everything he did in the name of God, you can find in Chronicles of the King of Yehuda. Now, who takes over? Let's go back stop the share for a minute. Hope it's clear. I want to understand why Yehoiakim, his successor, is so angry with God. We finally have a religious king, and everything goes bad. And the second, when Yirmiyahu continues with his prophecies, telling the people to do tshuva, Yoshiel's son, Yehoiakim, doesn't buy it. He's just angry with God, and he starts rebelling against God. Now, here's the big question. Was Yoshiel's repentance enough to undo the decree from the time of Menachem? I want to go back to what we said last week. There was a decree of destruction in the time of Menachem. At the last minute, Menachem sort of did tshuva, and Yoshua does tremendous tshuva. But there's still a decree of destruction on the first temple. Is it over? And are we now in the second temple period? That's what people in Yoshiel's time thought. Or is it still the end of the first temple period? And what the Nevi'im are saying, you're still the Gzar Din, the Gzera, that's what Choda was saying, it's still hovering over you. And if you don't do total tshuva, it's not enough just to fix up your temple. You have to totally redo your society and totally fix your ways. It's not enough just to become more religious and bring korbanot and fix up your temple. That wouldn't be enough. The people don't buy it. And when this righteous king Yoshio dies in battle, it makes everyone depressed. It causes a backlash, but they're still hoping that Babylonia, right, won't become a superpower, nor will Egypt. They're still thinking the army's strong enough to become a superpower on their own. Therefore, when Yirmiyahu gives any type of advice, he loses all of his credibility. Once Yoshio dies, Yirmiyahu's credibility is lost. Now, Yirmiyahu doesn't stop, continues to warn the people, and Yehoiakim, again, Yoshio's successor, doesn't buy it. That brings us to, where are we now? Let's go back now to our share screen and our summary of the years. So under Yirmiyahu's career, there's 18 years under Yoshio. Again, year 13, they start tshuva of his reign. Year 18, they renovate the temple and they find the Sefer Torah. Year 31 is his tragic death to me. That's what we just talked about. Yehoiakim becomes king. Okay, again, he leaves God. He aligns himself with Egypt. Egypt, we'll see later. We'll see, if you have time, you can read. Egypt basically puts him into power. And in the 4th year of Yehoiakim's reign, that's when Nebuchadnezzar becomes king in Bavel, remember? But not in Israel yet, but in Mesopotamia. He defeats Ashur totally, and he begins his conquest of the Middle East in the 4th year of Yehoiakim. Will be a super important nevuah of Yirmiyahu in that year. Nebuchadnezzar begins his conquest of Judea, and in year 8, Yehoiakim begins to rebel against the Babylonians. We'll read this in Sefer Menachem in a minute. 3 years later, Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes over the city. Yehoiakim dies, and we'll see in a minute, Yehoiakim takes over. We'll read that story very soon. And then he goes into exile. We'll see why he goes into exile, but the temple's not destroyed. 11 years later, the Babylonians return, and the temple's destroyed. Now, what I want to explain today, what's the reason for these 2 waves of exile, and why Yirmiyahu is blamed for the destruction. Just a quick review beforehand. And there's a religious background to the political nevuah prophecy coming up, but we'll see again, Yirmiyahu chapter 7. I think we talked about this last week a little bit. When the last call for repentance, we'll read about it quickly. And then we have to talk about the decree of 7 years of Babel that we just saw briefly. So here's the background. I'll try to explain. When Yehoiakim becomes king, after Yoshio dies, again, everyone's depressed, but Yirmiyahu continues to tell the people they have to fix their ways. Some people are so angry with God, they start following other gods. Some people still serve God. And there's 2 groups of leadership. There's one group of leadership saying, forget religion, or let's follow the other gods. Our God doesn't help us. What's called the Nevi'ei Sheker, the God's prophets are telling the people, we have to pray harder, bring more korbanot, and come more to the temple and pray, and that can get the Babylonians off our back. But we're in this sort of tension between the Egyptians and the Babylonians. Who should we side with? Yehoiakim is pro-Egypt, and therefore he rebels against Babylonians. Now, the prominent opinion of the army people and all the advisors of the king is, we have to take Egyptian backing and form a coalition with our neighboring countries against the Babylonians, together with Egypt, with Egyptian backing. Yirmiyahu is going to come and tell the people, you have it all wrong. God is on Babylonian side, and give in to the Babylonians. Now, let me just show you real quick where Yirmiyahu says that. I'll share my screen now. And I want to show you now in our source sheet where Yirmiyahu gives his main message. Here. Again, this is for later reference. In the book of Yirmiyahu, the first 20 chapters are basically rebuke of Israel, and later rebuke of the leaders, chapters 20 to 29, and the book of Nehemiah 30-34, but that's a class in Yirmiyahu, not for now. Which is on the source sheet, for later. Because it's Erev Tisha B'Av, I want to, as a background, I want to share with you how Maimonides, the Rambam, understood what we're going to read in Yirmiyahu. Now, the Rambam brings the laws of the fast days in Sefer Zmanim. In the book of Zmanim of Times, there's Hilchot Taniyot. Listen to what he says in Hilchot Taniyot. It says, Mitzvah taseh min haTorah lizok lariya b'chatzotzot al kol tzar sheba'al hatzibor. He takes the pasuk in Sefer Bamidbar, whenever there's a tsar, remember with the chatzotzot in chapter 10 of Bamidbar, whenever there might be any trouble from any enemy around, we gather in the temple and we blow the trumpets, and we have to remember that God is judging us, and God will save us from enemies. We've quoted that pasuk before. Klomar, kol davar sheyatzar lo, any time we're in trouble, like a famine or an epidemic or any type of war, whatever that might be, okay? We have to gather together and cry out to God. That's sakah. I put the English if you want to see it later on. V'zeh davar zeh midarchei hatshuvahu. This is the way of tshuva, meaning when trouble happens, we don't blame our enemies, we blame ourselves, according to the Rambam. That's God sending, be it a famine, be it a drought, be it an epidemic, be it a war. God's sending that as a wake-up call because there's something we're doing wrong. And then we gather in the temple to find out what are we doing wrong. Here's so-called, here the Rabbi speaks. When there's trouble and we cry out about it, and we blow the shofar to wake ourselves up, people have to know it's our fault when things go wrong, not our enemy's fault. We're to blame. That doesn't mean we don't need to fight, but if we want God to help us in our fight, we have to be worthy, and therefore we have to ask ourselves, how can we improve our behavior and see that as a wake-up call that something's wrong in our society, we have to fix things. What are we doing wrong? We can argue about it, but that's why we go to the temple. Hopefully, the prophets will give us the right message. The Nevi'im and the Kohanim will give us the right message. We'll see this in Yirmiyahu. Now, he quotes from Yirmiyahu, Avonotechem mitu. We'll read these psukim in a minute. We're going to read them in a second. We'll see the pasuk in the background. The pasuk is quoting Yirmiyahu. V'zehu shigrom lehem lasir atzar mihem. If you want to get rid of the enemy, if you want God to help you against the enemy, you need to do proper tshuva. Now, this is a totally different message that most religious leaders give in any religion. What do they say? When you're going to war, bring sacrifices, pray. Even bring your firstborn son. Just every army, even the Roman army, they brought sacrifices to the gods, small g, to help them win their war. And there's war gods, and there's every nation has their gods. Yirmiyahu was saying there's one God, but if there's a war or a trouble, it's a wake-up call from God that we're doing something wrong. And if we want God to help us, we need to fix our ways. Again, what we're doing wrong, that's why we gather in the temple to hear from the rabbis what we're doing wrong, but hear from the Nevi'im. Okay. Now, avim lo yizaku, if they don't cry out to God and repent, v'lo yariu, means they don't blow the shofar to wake themselves up. Elo yamru davar zeh miminhag olam. That's things would happen. There's global warming. There's wars. That's what happens. That's why these things happen. And b'tzara zon nikro nikrait. This happened by chance. Harizeh derech achzariot. That's evil. V'goremet lem lidabek masem harim. That causes people to continue the bad ways, and they'll bring even more tzarot. What Shirat Tazinu talks about, or all the tochachot. And that's what it says in the Tochacha and Vayikra and Bechukotai. If you follow me by chance, I'll go with you by chance. Klomar, what's he saying? I'll bring you more trouble. It's going to get worse and worse until you finally wake up and do proper tshuva. Wait, that's the Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva. Now, I want to show you the pasuk in Yirmiyahu that he's quoting in chapter 5. That's the background for the Churban. Okay. Now, we're in chapter 5 now in Yirmiyahu. I want to show you, I'm going to quote selectively to get to the pasuk that Rambam was quoting in Yirmiyahu chapter 5, verse 25. I'll start from the beginning of the chapter, because he's harsh. It says, Shotutu b'chutzot Yerushalayim. Yirmiyahu says, take a walk in Jerusalem. Let me turn this off here. 1 second. Okay. Uruduna uvaktu b'chavet. Basically, walk the streets of Jerusalem and see what's happening. Okay. See if you find anybody doing justice and having proper faith in God, and I'll forgive him. People are saying Baruch Hashem, people are swearing in God's name. Im Chai Hashem Yomeru, if they're saying things and swearing in God's name, they're using it as a cover-up. Lachein l'sheker yishaveu. They're talking like they're from, like they're religious. They're saying things in God's name, but they're using it as a cover-up for their dishonesty. Okay? Hashem einecha lo lemuna hikito tabel lo chalu. You're hoping that people support you properly. Instead, you punish them, and they don't pray to you properly. Okay? Kilitem manucha, they don't take musa, they don't take rebuke, they don't internalize the message, and their faces are hard like rock. They don't do tshuva. The people aren't willing to listen to rebuke. They think they're fine and blaming everything on their enemies. So he says, so that's checking the people. As Yirmiyahu says, oh, maybe they're simple people, they're foolish people. But let's go. They don't know the ways of God. Yes. Let me go to the leaders of the people. The political leaders, the great rabbis, the religious leaders. I'll speak to them. I'll give them rebuke. They know the ways of God. They know the Rambam. The Rambam knew. Okay, the way of God. Right, but they also, even the leadership, right, broke their ways and didn't take the rebuke, and therefore God's punished them. In the analogy, God's sending lions from the forest to hit them, referring to the Babylonians coming in to attack us. Okay. Because all their sins are so bad. Now, here's our point. He goes on and on till verse 15. I'm going to bring a nation from far away. He's referring to the Babylonians. Goy etanu, a very strong nation. Goy me'olamu. Goy lo yitedeh l'shono v'lo tishma ma yidaber. A foreign nation from far away, you don't even understand their language. And his ashpato nowadays is a garbage pail, but the ashpa is basically what you hold, the quiver that you hold your arrows in. It's this endless supply of arrows coming, and their entire army, they're all great soldiers. Okay, what they'll do? They're going to come and they're going to eat up all of your produce, all your bread. Okay, they'll eat up your children. They're going to wipe out your country and all your fortified cities, everything you put your faith in. Okay. And this, he goes on and on about what they're going to do, the Babylonians. And here comes the pasuk. This nation, the people of Israel, Leiv Sorel Morev, a rebellious heart, means they don't take rebuke. Okay. They should have said in their heart, but they didn't say in their heart, Niranat Hashem, we should fear God. God who gives us rain at the right time. Geshem, that's the beginning of the rains in the beginning of the rainy season in Cheshvan. We talked about this in Shema. And the grain harvest in the spring. Okay. Now comes the pasuk Rambam quoted. Avonotechem hitu ele. Your sins cost all these troubles. Your difficulty with your harvest, as well as your difficulty with your foreign enemies. V'chatotechem manuato mikem. Your sins and your bad ways held back God being able to do good to you. Okay. Why? Ki nimtzu b'ami roshaim, the nation is full of evil people. Okay? And what do you call it? They're catching people with their tricks. Okay, the nation is like a cage full of chickens. Okay, just like there's a chicken coop basically full of crowded chickens. The houses are full of trickery. That's why they became great and became wealthy, because of their bad business practices, ripping people off. They got fat, they got haughty, etc. They didn't pay attention to evil things they're doing. Din lo danu, they didn't do proper justice. They didn't take care of the orphans as usual, and they didn't care about their success. Mishpat evyonim lo shafatu, they didn't do justice for the destitute. And it says, God can't allow, if we're God's people and serving Him, if our society is not just, there's no way God can allow that to continue. God has to bring an enemy. Now, it continues in chapter 7. That was chapter 5. In chapter 7, we've done this before. This is his famous nevuah he gives. Let me get rid of this. Cancel that. Okay. In chapter 7, Yirmiyahu says, Hebrew saying easy, so we don't need to do the English. Amod b'shar Beit Hashem, God stand at the entrance to Beit HaMikdash and give this message to the people coming to bow down to God. Remember, this is the nevuah to religious people. Here's the word of God. Fix your ways. Darchem is what you're doing. Malachem is what you're planning to dwell in this land. Don't put all your hopes in the words of the false prophets saying, just come to God's house. Hechal Hashem, he's making fun of the people saying, come to God's house and pray. That's not enough. But fix your ways, your society, do justice, be a man his fellow man, take care of, again, the stranger, orphan, and widow, etc. Don't oppress them. Don't cause innocent blood in this place. Don't follow other gods. etc., then you can stay in this land. But because you haven't done all these things, okay, Basiti labayit asher nikrash mi alav, asher potrim ba, kasher siti li Shiloh. The same fate that Shiloh had for their corruption, the same fate Jerusalem will have. We talked about that many times. They want to kill Yirmiyahu for this prophecy, predicting destruction. And then I want to show you in chapter 27, where Yirmiyahu tells the people, accept Babylonian sovereignty. Now, what was the message we saw in the beginning of chapter 25? We saw that in the beginning of today's shir. In the 4th year of Yehoiakim, that's where we began. In the 4th year of Yehoiakim, that was on the table, that's the critical event. That's where things turn around. Yirmiyahu gives the following nevuah. Because I've warned you for 23 years, you haven't listened. What's your punishment? I'm sending the Babylonians, and the Babylonians are sovereign now over the Middle East for the next 70 years. And therefore, your punishment is you've lost your sovereignty to the Babylonians. That's his point. Now, let me clarify this, because this is key to understanding the destruction. Yirmiyahu says as follows: 4th year of Yehoiakim, remember, 4 years after Yoshio dies in battle, the Babylonians have just become the new superpower in the Middle East, but they haven't taken over Israel yet. They're just beginning their conquest. They took over the Assyrian Empire. Yirmiyahu tells the people, in the name of God, because you didn't fix your society, your punishment is political. So I say, I'm not bringing you famine. I'm saying, I'm bringing the Babylonians, and that's your punishment. If you accept your punishment, put up a white flag to the Babylonians. Now, no one wants to buy that. You understand why? No one wants to be under foreign power. And no one believes Yirmiyahu is telling the truth. They accuse him of working for the Babylonians. They call him a false prophet. They want to kill him. Because what we'll see in a minute, the kings are forming a coalition against the Babylonians, together with older neighbors backed by Egypt. And they think they can defeat the Babylonians. What makes Yirmiyahu's career so difficult and so frustrating is that he's giving a nevuah that no one wants to listen to. He's telling the people, in the name of God, put up a white flag to the Babylonians. If you do that, you can stay in your land and keep your temple. You can do rehab at home. If you don't listen to that, the Babylonians come and take over and wipe out your temple and send you into exile. Now, if Yirmiyahu was telling the truth, the people, how would they do tshuva? The first stage of tshuva would be putting up a white flag, accepting that fate, and basically you can do rehab at home, fix your society, but under foreign rule. No one wants to buy that, especially the army people and the government people. But because I need everyone fighting, Yirmiyahu is going to weaken the troops. And therefore, Yirmiyahu becomes public enemy number one because he's a famous rabbi. And no one can listen to what he's saying. I want to bring examples from Israel today. But you can have some left-wing rabbi saying something, and it'll be called an enemy of the people. You're weakening our soldiers, you're causing us to lose battle. But instead of blaming themselves for what's going on, they're blaming the people give them rebuke. I'm not saying it's the same thing today. I'm just giving an example of a similar type of situation where Yirmiyahu is accused of being a public enemy. Now, they don't listen, and therefore the Babylonians are going to come in and fight Yehoiakim because Yehoiakim rebels against the Babylonians. It will take several years, and then he's destroyed. We're going to read this on Sefer Melachim. When Yehoiakim rebels, he dies in battle somewhere. We know he dies. We're not sure how he dies, but he dies before the Babylonians take over the city. His son Yehoiachin takes over, and when his son takes over, after 3 months, he puts up a white flag. He listens to Yirmiyahu, and then they point. There's a first wave of exile, but the reason the temple isn't destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar with the first wave of exile is because Yehoiachin puts up a white flag, and in a very organized manner goes into exile. Basically puts up a white flag. Tzidkiyahu becomes king appointed by the Babylonians, and had he remained subservient to the Babylonians, the temple could have remained, and there didn't need to be another wave of exile. The reason the Babylonians come back and attack again with Nufus Adron is because he rebels in year 5. That's what I want to show you now in the last 15, 20 minutes. And that'll be the reason for the Qurban at the end of Beit Rishon. It'll be more of a political mistake than all because they don't appreciate Yirmiyahu's Nevuah. So let's take a look now let me open up quickly. I share my screen this time. Let's open up Sefer Melachim. chapter 23. Here we are. What are we here? That's the end of Yoshiao. Here. After Yoshiao loses his battle, here. This is the story of Yoshiao's death. In the end of chapter 23 in Menachem, Yochaz becomes king just for several months, and Paro, on his way back from Carchemish, they won the battle in Carchemish. I mean, actually, he lost the battle in Carchemish. On his way back, though, Paro comes and punishes the people in Jerusalem, and he makes and Paro Necho makes Eliakim king and changed his name to Yoakim. Yoakim is made king by Paro on his way back, and Yochaz is sent down and he dies there. Okay, now who paid this extra tax that the Egyptians put on Judea for the rebellion? He takes it from the people from the Am Haaretz, the same people who made Yochaz king and were against Yoakim. But basically, Yoakim becomes king because of Egyptian backing. Now, he becomes king when he's 25, Yoakim. He's king for 11 years. His mother's name, etc. He does evil. Let's pick up now in chapter 24. Okay. During his reign, during Yoakim's reign, here's the story of the Churban and Malachim. That's our topic today. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, comes. Yoakim is subservient to him in the beginning for 3 years as they come in, and then he rebels against them. He begins by sort of giving in, and then rebels in year 8. Okay. God sends the Yudim from all these areas in Yehuda, and things start falling apart. Like he warned them with all the Nevi'im. And this is but this is all coming. Why? Because of the original decree of Churban, of destruction from the time of Menachem. That was my beginning statement, that hovering over them is a decree of destruction from the time of Menachem, which we can undo with tremendous tshuva. The tshuva is not strong enough to undo that decree. Okay? And also the Damnaki that both Menachem spelled, and also we'll see Yehoiakim as well. As Yehoiakim continues in Menache's ways, but God's not forgiving them or giving them another chance because it's all started from the time of Menachem. He's continuing their ways. Now, the rest of what Yehoiakim did, okay? Yehoiakim dies, Yoachin becomes king after him. Okay. Now, here's the key to the failure. Our Egyptian support fell apart. The Egyptians were promising military aid if we join the coalition against Babel. They don't come to help us at all. They retreat, and we're left alone. Why? The Babylonian assault took over most of Mesopotamia and started going all the way down to Nachum Mitzrayim. That's El Arish. They didn't get into the Nile itself, but the area in the Sinai they took over as well. And Egypt pretty much can't come out and help us anymore. Yocham becomes king when he's 18. And I'm saying here's 18 in Melachim. I mean, it's either 8 or 18, but 18 is fine. He's king for 3 months. What's he do? He's not a good king. But what does he do though? The Nebuchadnezzar comes in. Okay, the city's under siege, and Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel a year. Sorry, melech. Vayitze Yehoiakim melech Yehuda al melech Bavel hu v'imo b'avadav v'sharav b'kach oto melech Bavel b'shan shmona l'macho. In the 8th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, not it, from year 4 of Yoakim to year 11, basically, in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Yoakim, who was king only for several months, puts up a white flag. Basically, he listens to Yirmiyahu, and to get rid of the siege and to save the temple and save the city, Yoakim surrenders in an official manner to the Babylonians. That's very different to what happened with Tzidkiyahu. I'm trying to explain to you why Nebuchadnezzar doesn't destroy the temple in his first wave of conquest, because Yoakim surrenders and he listens to Yirmiyahu. No. What did they take out of Jerusalem? They take out all the treasuries of the temple. They leave the temple and the Klei Zahav, the golden things, but the Klei Nechoshet, they take out. I'm sorry, the other way around. They take the golden vessels, the ones that Shlomo made, all the backup gold things. And we'll see later they'll take the bronze. But basically, they take the booty of the temple, but they leave the temple running. And he puts into exile the important people of Yerushalayim. He glad Yerushalayim, all the ministers, all the army people, and there's all the people who might rebel. He exiles them. And all the industrialists, the people who know how to make arms. they can use them in Bavel, and they can start a revolt as well in Jerusalem. And the simple people, the poor people, they live in Jerusalem. That's the first. That's Vayegot Yoachin, but that's called Galut Yoachin or Galut Yechoniah. Megilat talks about it. That's when Yecheskel goes into exile. That's when Mordechai's great grandfather went into exile, etc. That's called Galut Yoachin. That's the important people, and the king and his whole family go to exile from Jerusalem to Bavel. And again, the entire army, the 7,000 men of the army, all the industrialists, the Charash Mazger, they all go to Bavel into exile. Now, Vayamlech Melech Bavel. Now, the king of Bavel is going to appoint a vassal king, and the uncle of Yoachin, or basically Yoachim's brother, Yoshia's other son, his name was Matanya. Matanya, that's Yoachin's uncle, became king, and the king changed his name to Tzidkiel. Did we ever discuss this? Someone tell me why would the king of Bavel, first of all, why is he changing the king's name? And why is he calling him Tzidkiel? Someone give me a good reason.
He changes his name to show that the king of Bavel has mastery over his puppet.
Okay.
And he calls him Tzidkiel because that's a big joke.
No, because who's his advisor?
Who's advisor?
Who is Melech Bavel's advisor for Jewish affairs?
Oh, Yirmiyahu.
Yirmiyahu. Now, yeah, all you have to do is open up Yirmiyahu, which should be over here. Where's Yirmiyahu? Yirmiyahu. Open up Yirmiyahu chapter 23. This is in Shmon Esrei. It's twice in Yirmiyahu. Okay. Hine Yamim Bayim. Okay. Nim Hashem Bakimoti LeDavid Semech Tzadik. Umalach Melech V'Skil V'Asem Mishpat Tzedakah Ba'aretz, like Isaiah was talking about. A time will come it'll spring up a righteous king from Judea. He'll do justice and righteousness. B'yamav tivasha Yehuda v'yiso yishkon lebetach. V'zeh shmo ashikruhu Hashem tzidkenu. Got that? So, what's Yirmiyahu want Tzidkiel to do? No, the king has to change his name to show him in charge. But his advisor to Jewish affairs says, this king, accept Babylon, that's exactly chapter 25 of Yirmiyahu, accept Babylonian sovereignty, and just focus on Mishpat and Tzedakah. And then 7 years from now, you'll get your sovereignty back. You're in rehab in your country. Okay. Now, I think
can I ask a question, please?
Sure. Go ahead.
That part in Yirmiyahu sounds like he's speaking about the Mashiach. You can't possibly have a Mashiach while under the Babylonian rule.
But you can start Mashiach that way. That's
Okay.
Tzemach David. That's how you
Fair
begin.
enough.
You don't begin Mashiach by blowing up the mosque and taking on the whole Middle East with power. You bring Mashiach by being worthy of God's help and acting in a way of a nation worthy of sovereignty. But it begins with education. Here.
I have another.
This is chapter 33 in Yirmiyahu. That's right out of Shmon Esrei, right? Yeshayahu in chapter 11 said the same thing. Okay, so we're just...
That's fine. I have another question, though.
Yeah.
Is Galut Yehoiachin the Galut wave in which Daniel went to Bavel?
Here, let me just show you chapter 11 in Isaiah. There was a sprout would come out from the tree cut off from the house of David from Yishai. Okay. V'nach ruach Hashem ruach chokhmah bina. V'rechol briat Hashem v'lo men v'shpot. Etc. V'shapat b'tzedek dalim. V'ochiach v'mishol ve'aretz. V'yep b'piv. That's the tzedek yizor mutnav v'emunah yizor chalatzav. Remember, this is on the thing. Lo yishkot b'har kodeshi. Kimaz de'at Hashem b'yam machasim. That's how the Rambam ends. Mishneh Torah. Okay, that's Melech HaMashiach that Isaiah is talking about. That's all the psukim. V'martem b'emo odcha ki anaftebi, hinel yeshuati, v'shabayim b'sason, v'martem b'emo hod Hashem ki tov, etc. Okay, all the songs we sing on Yom Ha'atzmaut, that's Mashiach. You follow? Mashiach is what God gives us opportunities. We have to be worthy of it. Mashiach isn't someone coming and winning military victories. Remember, Eliyahu's job is to make us worthy of Mashiach of Yom Hashem. Not saying he's coming, you waited long enough now, say 5 magic prayers and somebody's going to come and help you. Mashiach is something we have to earn. It's a two-way street. And knowing Mashiach can happen doesn't mean it will happen. It means it can happen. Don't give up hope. But remember, it's a two-way street. It's a super important message. It's not taught enough. Anyway, I'll stop ranting.
Thank
yeah,
you
question.
very much. I have another question.
Yeah, sure, Maya.
Daniel, is Galut Yehoiachin the wave of the Galut with which Daniel went, or did he go with another one?
So Daniel went with this wave as a young child. He'll be important once, there was an option for the redemption to happen within Jerusalem. But we'll see what changes. Had the people in Jerusalem remained dedicated and subservient to Bavel and not rebelled, they would have been the future. What's going to change? In year 5 of Tzidkiel, they decide to rebel against the Navi's wishes, and that's going to be the turning point. Because the first date, the first Nevuah of Yecheskel, in chapter 1, it's year 5 of the exile of Galut Yehoiachin. It's the same year that the government in Jerusalem decides to rebel against the Babylonians. That's when God decides the Shekinah is leaving Jerusalem and going to Bavel, and now the future's in Bavel. Had Tzidkiel been Tzidkiel, and the people not rebelled against the Babylonians, not the right wingers didn't take over again, right? The redemption could have happened in Jerusalem. And the exiles would have come back later on, but the center would have been in Jerusalem. Because of the political rebellion by Tzidkiel, that ruins everything. And that's the reason for the Qurban. We'll see. Your question is right on the mark. We'll see it here. Now, this is the big event, and we're going to read now in Yirmiyahu chapter, back on a regular source sheet. Yirmiyahu chapter 27. Here we are. Yirmiyahu chapter 27. I'm sorry, all this stuff. Now we're in. It's the. I'm sorry, we did the. So I'm speaking from here. We did chapter 5, but we did all these things. Yirmiyahu chapter 27. Okay. What's Yirmiyahu telling the people? Both during Yehoiakim, but especially during Tzidkiel, he walks around with the yoke to tell the people given to Bavel. Watch what's happening. We'll see in a minute. This is in year 5, year 4 or 5. This is year 4 of Tzidkiel, 4 years after the first wave of exile, when we should remain under Babylonian rule, but the people can't take it and they want to rebel. The right wingers get back in power again, and this is what happens. Take bands and bars basically connecting to a yoke, and bishilachtam b'melech Edom, b'melech Moab, b'melech Bnei Ammon, b'melech Tzor, b'melech Sidon, b'ed malachim habayim Yerushalayim b'tzidkei melech Yehuda. What do we see? Emissaries from the whole Middle East, from Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tzor, Sidon. Got it? That's all of our neighbors around us, backed by Egypt, are meeting in Jerusalem. Who's at the center of this rebellion? Tzidkiel. Yirmiyahu intrudes into this government meeting and makes little yokes to tell the foreign ministers to bring this back to your kings. Go tell your masters the saying, Kol Hashem, go tell this to your master. Basically, I'm the God of heaven and earth, I'm the God of creation, and I give the land to who I see fit. Who quotes this pasuk? Anyone remember? The first Rashi in Chumash. Remember? Coming to explain why does Sefer Bereshit begin with, why does that Chumash begin with Sefer Shemot? Why didn't Sefer Bereshit? Not to tell you the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. That's a misreading Rashi. Tell you the land of Israel belongs to God, and God gives it to its worthy. It means Bereshit, God's telling us, I'm giving you someone else's land, the land of Canaan. It's not your land. It's God's land. They lose it for their bad behavior. You have it on the condition you act properly. It's not yours, it's God's land. Kidli kol haaretz. And I need Sefer Bereshit to know the land doesn't belong to us. It's our responsibility, but it's God's. And we lose it if we don't keep it right. And that's why Rashi quotes Rabbi Yitzchak, who's quoting this pasuk from Yirmiyahu when he takes it away. I'm giving all this land to Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel Avi, my servant. We talked about this before. Okay? I'm giving Nebuchadnezzar the right to punish you. You haven't lived up to your goal. You haven't used the land properly. I'm giving you a chance to do rehab at home. Okay, now, but I'm using Bavel to punish you, basically. And they're in charge of the whole Middle East now for the next 3 generations, for the next 7 years. There was three generation dynasty of Bavel. And then Vaya Goyim Amlacha Asher Le'Abdu Melech Bavel. Anyone who doesn't give in to Bavel, they're finished. And that's Nebuot Yirmiyahu later on the nations. Don't listen to your bad advisors telling you to fight Bavel. Okay, don't listen to them because it's false nevuah. And any nation who puts their neck into the yoke of Bavel, they can stay in their land. In other words, you can keep Israel and keep your land if you put up a white flag here. I'm telling Tzidkiyahu explicitly, accept Babylonian sovereignty, accept their yoke, and you can stay in your land and you can survive. No destruction, no more exile. Okay? Why should you die with by sword and by famine, etc.? Because that's what happens when you're under siege. And that's what happened to any nation not accepting this decree of Babylonian rule. The false prophets are telling in God's name, they're making it up. Fight Bavel, we can win. Okay? They're saying things in God's name. He never said they're giving, that's the false prophets. I didn't send them, these false prophets. They're saying things in God's name. They're God's prophets, making a prophecy that God never said. They're so sure that they're right. And that's your punishment for your haughtiness and your lack of understanding of why God's punishing you. And the Kohanim as well, the priests in the temple, they're also making the same mistake. Everyone's gung-ho, we can defeat the Babylonians. Our army's strong enough. Okay? Don't listen to the Nevi'im. Saying, giving you promise, the temple, the Kelim temple, Mashiach's coming. That Yoachin's coming back, the Kelim are coming back, the worst is over. No, it's false hopes. Okay? Don't listen to them. Yeah? Sir Melech Bavel and Hunas, don't listen to this. We're gonna win, we're gonna win. You're being punished now, accept your punishment. That's it. If the real prophets, what should they be saying? Not that you're gonna win militarily. The real prophets, pray that more vessels don't go into exile. And pray the temple won't be destroyed. It's basically given to Bavel. Okay? And then he says the rest of the Kelim, they're going to go to Bavel until I bring him back. He goes on and on. All the famous Bavel Yavo V'Shem Yavo, you ad Yom Pakti Otam. That's what the Gemara Ketubos quotes about. Not making up, that's a whole different topic. Now, what happened? Now we're reading Malachim, what happened at the end. Yoakim dies, remember? Melech Mitzrayim didn't come out. Yoakim becomes king when he's 8. Remember? We saw this already. We read this from Malachim. Okay, that's the first wave of exile. And then by Menachem, it's Tzidkiyahu. Now let's just read the Churban in chapter 25. And then we are done. We're over time. I'll do it real quick because I want to get to the Churban. Again, year 5, what happens? The rebellion starts. That's when Yechezkel begins and the Shekhinah leaves. It's only a matter of time now. Now, once Tzidkiyahu rebels, he's finished. Do you follow? Nebuchadnezzar can't come back and say, okay, we'll make a deal. They don't trust us anymore. We made a deal. And Tzidkiyahu has to run away like a chicken. And they won't take any surrender anymore. He's had it with them. Now, the rebellion is actually successful for 2 or 3 years. Remember, they rebel in year 5. They're successful year 6, 7, 8. Year 9, Nebuchadnezzar, the general, comes back on a new Babylonian campaign. We'll just read the end of Sefer Melachim now. The last chapter, where are we? Kings, there are 2 Kings, chapter 25. The sad part. In the 9th year of Tzidkiyahu, okay, in the 10th month, that's Asar B'Tevet, Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, comes with his army and puts a siege on the city. And the siege for a year and a half until the 11th year. Okay? In the 9th month, on the 9th day of the 9th month, it says here, something like that. That's the wall of the city is breached, okay? And they start chasing the king, and he runs away. They catch the king by Yericho. They bring him to Rivla in Syria. They judge him. They shecht his children in front of his eyes. Okay, they poke out his eyes afterwards, and they put him into jail. Okay. In the 5th month, okay, that's Av, and the 7th day of the month, Tisha then, and Rishon was on the 7th of Av. In the 19th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, it's like basically 18 years since he came into power. Okay, Prophet Zadran, the general now, Nebuchadnezzar himself is busy in Rivla. Zadran, his general, comes. Again, he's an Evet to Melech Bavel, who's an Evet to Hashem. He burns God's house in Beit HaMelech and Beit Yerushalayim. They destroy the wall of the city. That's the end of Beit Rishon. Zadran is the one doing the actual destruction, not Nebuchadnezzar, but his general Zadran. The rest of the people now go into exile. Okay? And Nebuchadnezzar sends them all out. And the very poor people, right? People aren't going to rebel. Okay, they live with what do you call it? They left as farmers in the city, but not in Jerusalem. They go with Gedaliah thing. The rest of the copper of the Nechoshet Kelim, the Zav was taken. Now Nechoshet is taken out to Bavel, and they take their all the gold stuff they took. Now they're taking the copper and all the Kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. It goes on and on. The Amudim, the Yachin Boaz they take back. They talk about how big all the thing was. Basically, they took all that's the Vaikachodam. There was the Ram of Tabachim, Be'ochem, Bebelach Bavel. That's the big exile about Rishon. Okay, he takes the important people. He takes the Rivla. He kills them, publicly, to show, and the rest of the people are exiled. Okay, and the people who left in Israel, he left with Gedai ben Achikam and Nitzpah. And then we have the story of Gedai ben Achikam. That's already a different story. Okay, so that's the end of Beit Rishon. But the rebellion. That's why Yirmiyahu, I'm trying to explain to you, Yirmiyahu's Nevuah in year 4 of Yehoiakim, 18 years before the Churban, to give in to Bavel, that could have saved everything. No one wanted to listen to him because who wants to accept foreign power? And I'm just using analogy for today, and I'm saying it's the same thing today. But they have this full right-wing government that they're sure that they can take on the Babylonians. Egypt will help us. They have this coalition, and they're sure in their own strength, and that overconfidence in their army and not listening to the rebuke of the Navi. Why? They don't understand why God wouldn't be helping them. They're so religious. They're praying to God, and they're false prophets saying in God's name, "You're going to win. Just pray harder." And one left-wing prophet's telling them, "That's not enough. Swallow your pride. You were so bad. You need to be under foreign rule for rehab for more than a generation, for 70 years. No one wants to buy that, not willing to accept that bitter punishment of losing your sovereignty causes the temple to be destroyed. And therefore Yirmiyahu is considered the enemy of the people. They blame the Churban on him. Basically, that's a class in Yirmiyahu already. So Yirmiyahu, who writes Sefer Melachim, now you understand why you need Yirmiyahu to understand Sefer Melachim. But the tragedy of what caused the Churban basically to happen was again, I shouldn't be so mean, but basically an extreme right-wing government not listening to the wrong rabbis and not listening to the right rabbis, telling you to fix their society, that led to the first temple's destruction. So if we're studying Tisha B'Av, remember not what happened, but why it happened. I think there's a lot of guidance we can have from learning Yirmiyahu. That's why, again, most yeshivas don't learn this and don't want to learn this. And for the same reason people don't like hearing this, the same thing happened with not wanting to listen to that message and only wanting to hear what people want to hear, not what they need to hear. Brought down the first temple, later the second temple, Bar Kokhba revolt, the same pattern. And hopefully we can learn from our history. Okay, with that sad note, we'll take questions real fast. Yeah, let me just check the chat real fast. Yeah, let me just check the chat real fast.
Yeah. So you said the army was taken in the first Gullus. So what did they rebel with in the second? It was just the poor people left.
They become soldiers also. Some people think you just take out one. There's only a certain amount of army people, and if you kill them all, they won't rebel against you. They'll go away. But they didn't. They thought they took out all of them, and remember, a lot of them went into hiding. They came back from the field later on.
Okay.
Then the armies make notice. You got the leaders of the army you took out, but the people are people, and when no one wants to be under foreign rule, and they rebel. So there's no shortage of that's military history.
Thank you.
Okay. Somebody to leave. Okay, Asher asked, didn't Yirmiyahu tell Yoshio not to go? Exactly. It doesn't say in Yirmiyahu, but in Divrei Yamim, it's implicit that Yirmiyahu must have told him, or some Navi told him. Because in Divrei Yamim, it says when Parachol told Yoshio, leave me alone, and our book is saying that was from God. So the Navi must have told Yirmiyahu, Yoshio not to go up. Chazal talk about it, and they say he was Doresh b'chukotai, because if you follow God's laws, he thought he was in the time of Mashiach, and therefore nothing can go wrong. And he understood not as a promise, as an indicator that you're doing well, but as a mitzvah, that if you think you're in a messianic time period, don't let any foreign army pass through your country. As he understood as a commandment, not as a sign of a promise of for good behavior. You follow how they darshan it? Yeah, that was part of his self-confidence that this is a messianic time period, nothing can go wrong. So the danger when you think you're in a messianic time period and you're not worthy of it, you act like you think God's on your side. Yes, Sandra?
In yesterday's Haftarah, Yeshayahu tells us that Yerushalayim will be like a sukkah abandoned in a kerem. Amos says, Yakim lanu et sukkot David hanufelet. Do you think Amos is providing a happy ending to Yeshayahu?
That's exactly what happened. Jerusalem was saved under Chizkiel. Jerusalem was saved at the last minute after Lachish was destroyed, and that's why they think because Jerusalem was never destroyed. That's what they say in Yirmiyahu's trial. They say, hey, there was a Navi, Micham ben Yivla, said Jerusalem would be destroyed, and it wasn't destroyed, and therefore that proved that Jerusalem can't be destroyed. That's a big argument in chapter 26 in Yirmiyahu. If a Navi says the temple could be destroyed, is he a Navi? Is he automatically a false prophet? And do you kill him?
Rabbi.
And the proof they're bringing a proof from the time of Chizkiel where the temple was never destroyed. Why was it say? Because Jerusalem can't be destroyed. Because it's God's house.
Rabbi,
so how could God's house be destroyed?
Why
saying it can be destroyed, like Shiloh was destroyed.
Rabbi, why in the time from Yirmiyahu, the people were not sure that he is really a real prophet? The fact that even the king put him in jail right in the front of everybody else. So why there was not any notification or any clarification that what he says was really Shem Hashem, from Hashem?
That was I'll show you. Cheskel talks about it. Cheskel says something really harsh. I'll show you. That's the big question when you study Yirmiyahu. Cheskel in chapter 14 alludes to an answer. He says as follows. No, chapter 14. Am I in 14? Chapter 14. Let's see, 14. Here we go. Here. He talks about here. Okay. He talks about he's giving to what do you call it? The elders of Judea are coming and complaining to them. Okay? They want redemption in Bavel, and because you're not going to get it. So he says as follows, okay? But Navi, the prophet, if a Navi is giving a false prophecy, I'm allowing him to do it. I'm not why? And I'm going to come and turn around and punish you. Why? Listen carefully to verse 10. Kavon hadoresh, kavon hanavi. Why are the people being punished for the false prophecies of the prophets? The prophets are to blame, saying things that God's name never said. Why the people? It says the people are being punished for wanting to hear the words of the false prophets. The people are listening to the prophets they want to hear, not what they need to hear. And why are the false prophets giving so many false prophecies? Because that's what the people want to hear. Now, what causes the prophets to give false prophecy? The people wanting to hear false prophecy. When people only want to hear, when the people want to hear words of redemption, we're going to win, we're going to defeat our enemies. Instead of wanting to listen to rabbis saying, fix your society, fix your ways, behave properly, act in a way that sanctifies God, they'd rather hear rabbis saying, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win. Just pray harder. Okay? He says that's why you're getting false prophets, because you're listening to the prophets who are saying what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. So that's why the people are to blame for the false prophets, because they're the cause of the false prophets. That's kavon hanavi, kavon hadoresh. Where Cheskel is explaining to the people why there's so many false prophets, that's your punishment. Because if you read Chumash properly, you should know who to listen to. But people don't want to. Had you understood Yeshayahu properly, you wouldn't have known that. Had you learned Amos and Michal, we went through this 50, 60 years ago, and we had the words of those prophets with you. You don't listen to them. That was Yirmiyahu chapter 7. But Cheskel is being really harsh. He's saying, Kavon hanavi, kavon hadoresh. You get the people being punished for listening to the prophets who's saying what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. So he's harsh, but that's the answer he gives. Okay, Rabbi J.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Rabbi.
Next week, after 9 days, I'll be kinder next. We'll go back. I'm
Okay,
doing one or
go
two
back
classes
to
for
one
Malachim, and we'll
prophet.
start.
Yeah. Okay,
The
great.
next
Yes,
week we'll have more nechama, but I have to be mean this week. Okay.
Yeah, please God. We should. Extremism is
You need.
not good in so many ways. Rav Zachariah ben Avkulis, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, on and on and on. And it's important to say that message. Moderation is the Jewish way, and we live.
But it's just mind-boggling how people make the same mistakes.
I mean,
again.
look, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai was willing to give up Yerushalayim. I mean, not willing, he did, and the rabbis say the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed and we were exiled because Rav Zachariah ben Avkulis, had his extreme
Makpid on
religion.
every tiny little, what do you call it? Every
Yeah,
finger.
we can't. What people will say. I have a lot to say about this, but it's not for now. But anyways, I know we see eye to eye on this issue, and it is important, I think, especially to mention it without getting into the politics. This is what our tradition teaches. Anyways, thank you. I put the Tisha B'Av, registration. You haven't registered yet online, and we're looking forward for a meaningful day, and we're looking forward for peace, and that we should have great leaders like Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai and Hillel, and that's the whole Torah, is how to treat people nicely. That's what Torah is all about, and we should be zocheh to leadership and to peace and to good things. And okay, Benny Gesundheit is giving the shir, of course, in Hebrew in half an hour on Sefer Tilim, shir bivrit, and then next we'll meet on Tisha B'Av, and then we'll have our shir on Thursday, Shuli and Parsha and Siddur the rest of the week, and we look forward to learning. Please invite a friend to join, and Rabbi, be well, and we should hear good news, and everybody have a wonderful day. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Amen ותודה רבה.
Okay, bye.